I was 32 years old the night my dad finally said the kind of thing that stays lodged in your bones long after the sound of his voice fades. Christmas Eve should have felt warm and familiar, but instead it felt like the walls of our little house in Maple Ridge were shrinking, inch by inch. Snow drifted down outside the windows in soft white waves, the kind that make the world look peaceful. Inside that dining room, nothing felt peaceful at all. The table was set beautifully, the way my stepmom Martha always did it. A deep green tablecloth, candles that smelled faintly of pine, and her good china that only came out twice a year. My Aunt Linda and her son Tyler had driven in from Pueblo that morning. Everyone looked tired, but cheerful in that holiday way, like we were all trying our best. I kept telling myself it would be fine, that Christmas would soften whatever tension my dad and I kept stumbling into. Ever since I moved back in, I had been home for a little over 2 months by then. I had spent the summer working in Denver at a marketing firm, finally feeling like a real adult, with benefits and a matching 401k. Then came the layoffs in October. That familiar rug pulled out from under me. I tried to stay afloat, took on freelance projects where I could, but Denver rent does not care about your determination. After too many nights staring at my bank balance and swallowing the panic rising in my throat, I called my dad and asked if I could come home for a bit. And before I go any further, I want to ask you something. What are you doing while you listen to this story right now? Maybe you are making dinner. Maybe you are on a walk. Maybe you are trying to unwind after a long day. For me, the night this all happened, I was sitting at my dad's dining table in Maple Ridge, pretending I still belonged in a house that no longer fit me. That night, everything inside me shifted. I kept rehearsing a little thank you speech in my head. Nothing dramatic, just a few words to let my dad know I appreciated being allowed back home. He was a man who believed in pulling your own weight. He reminded me of that every time he saw me, working on my laptop or helping Martha fold laundry. I knew he resented that I had come back. I felt it every time he sighed when I opened the fridge, or when he asked how many jobs I had applied to that day. Still, I tried. I picked up groceries with the little money I made. I cleaned the guest room. I helped Martha with chores she never asked me to do. I tried to earn my place under that roof, but in my dad's eyes, I was still a kid who could not keep her life together without running home. The food that night looked amazing. Turkey roasted to a deep golden brown, mashed potatoes with gravy, Martha made from scratch, and her cranberry orange relish that was always my favorite. For a few minutes, we even laughed, the way families do when they are determined to pretend everything is fine. I watched the candles flicker and thought, maybe this would be the night he eased up on me. Tyler asked about Denver. Aunt Linda complimented my sweater. Even my dad gave me a nod when I passed him the rolls. It felt like maybe, just maybe, we were inching toward normal. When there was a quiet moment, I placed my napkin on my lap and took a breath. I planned to stand up, smile, and thank everyone for letting me stay. But as I inhaled, ready to speak, my dad pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. The room fell still. Martha lowered her fork. Tyler stopped mid-bite. Something in the way my dad stood, shoulders squared and jaw tight, made the air feel heavier. He lifted his glass. I waited for the usual holiday blessing, the kind he used to give when I was little, talking about gratitude and family. Instead, he said the greatest gift you can give this family this Christmas is to stop being a freeloader and get out of our lives. It took a few seconds for the words to land. They hit like cold water poured straight down my spine. My ears rang. The candles blurred for a moment. I thought maybe he had meant it as a joke. A harsh one, but a joke nonetheless. But his face did not soften. His eyes stayed flat. He kept talking, saying things I had always feared he thought about me. That I was irresponsible. That I was draining them. The people in town were asking why his grown daughter was back home again. I tried to explain. My voice came out thin and unsteady. I told him I was trying, that I was picking up freelance work, that I was contributing when I could. He waved it away. He said any real adult could stand on their own 2 feet without running home, every time life got hard. The worst part was the silence around me. Nobody said a word. Aunt Linda stared down at her plate. Tyler bit his lip and looked anywhere but at me. Martha made a soft sound, almost like she wanted to protest, but she did not follow through. She just folded her napkin over and over again in her lap. That silence hurt more than my dad's words. I realized then that nothing I could say would make a difference. So I swallowed whatever pride I had left and nodded. I said I would gather my things. My voice sounded calm, far calmer than my body felt. As I stood up, my legs trembled so badly I had to steady myself on the back of my chair. I walked down the hallway, past old family photos, and the doorway to what used to be my childhood room, before my dad cleared it out to store tools and boxes. Inside the small guest room where I had been staying, I pulled my suitcases out from under the bed and began packing. My hands shook as I folded shirts and shoved toiletries into a bag. And somewhere between grabbing my laptop charger and stuffing my pajama pants into the side pocket of my suitcase, a memory rose up from the back of my mind, one I had not let myself think about in years. My older sister Megan was standing in that same doorway the night before she died. Snow in her hair, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. Her voice was quiet and tight when she said, "If something ever happens to me, do not let it get buried." I had been too young to understand what she meant. The next morning she was gone, taken by a crash on icy roads outside town. Everyone said it was an accident. My dad insisted it was an accident, and eventually I stopped asking questions. But lying there in the motel room later that night, her words would take on a meaning I was not ready for yet. For now, I zipped my suitcase and carried it down the hall. When I passed the dining room on my way out, the scene was almost surreal. My dad sat back down as if nothing had happened, Martha wiping her eyes with the corner of her napkin. Aunt Linda cut her turkey into tiny pieces, Tyler staring at his hands. No one called after me. I stepped outside into the snow. It slapped against my cheeks, sharp and cold. My breath came out in white clouds. I loaded my bags into my little car and slid behind the wheel, gripping it until my knuckles hurt. For a long moment, I stared at the yellow glow of the dining room windows. I could hear faint laughter. My dad's voice. They had already returned to their meal. I started the engine. The tires crunched over frozen snow as I pulled away from the house. The streets of Maple Ridge were quiet, blanketed in white. Christmas lights glowed from porches and trees, soft and cheerful, completely at odds with the hollow ache in my chest. The only motel with vacancies was a squat building near the interstate with a flickering neon sign. The room I took was small, drafty, and smelled faintly of bleach. I crawled onto the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling while the heater rattled. And that is when Megan came back to me. The sound of her voice, the seriousness in her eyes, the warning I had ignored. If something happens to me, do not let it get buried. I had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, I would finally start to understand what she meant. And the truth, waiting beneath the surface, would explain exactly why my dad wanted me out of that house. And whatever truth was waiting beneath the surface would explain exactly why my dad wanted me out of that house. I woke with a headache that settled behind my eyes, the kind that comes from a night of trying not to cry. The motel room was cold, despite the heater rattling near my feet. I stared at the ceiling for a few minutes, replaying everything from Christmas Eve, the way my dad had looked straight through me when he told me to get out, the way everyone else had kept eating like my humiliation was just another part of the evening. By 7:30 in the morning, I gave up on pretending to rest. I wanted my things. I wanted to stop feeling like a runaway, hiding in a motel off the interstate. Most of all, I wanted answers. I did not know what those answers were yet, but they had something to do with Megan and the look she had given me. Then, night before she died. I checked out of the motel, stepped out into cold air that pinched my cheeks, and drove across Maple Ridge to my dad's house. When I pulled up, his truck was gone. Martin's sedan sat in the driveway, dusted with snow. My heartbeat slowed a little. Facing her was easier than facing him. I knocked on the door. After a moment, Martha opened it just a crack, then wider when she saw it was me. Her eyes looked tired, as if she had not slept any better than I had. She asked softly if I had come for my things, and stepped aside to let me in. I could tell she had been crying at some point. Her voice was thin, her hands restless. She said my boxes were in the garage because my dad wanted the guest room cleared out. The words hit hard, but I simply nodded. The house smelled like damp pine from the Christmas tree in the corner. I kept my head down and followed her through the kitchen to the garage door. The garage lights flicked on with a buzz. 3 boxes sat close to the door. My name written in my dad's heavy, blocky handwriting. I opened the first one. Clothes. Books. Odds and ends from the life I had tried to build in Denver. All small enough to fit inside cardboard. Martha hovered near the door, rubbing her hands together as if she was cold, even though the garage was not that chilly. I asked if Dad was coming back soon. She hesitated before saying he had left early. She did not know where he went, or maybe she did and did not want to tell me. As I started stacking the boxes for the first trip to my car, something on the high shelf caught my eye. A small wooden chest, dark from age, with a simple metal latch. A faded sticker of a crescent moon clung to one side, peeling at the edges. My breath caught. I remembered it. Megan called it her treasure chest. She used to guard it like it held the secrets of the universe. After she died, I never saw it again. I assumed it had been thrown out during the weeks after the funeral when my dad refused to let us touch her room. I stepped closer without even thinking. My hand lifted toward the shelf. Martha moved fast, faster than I expected. She grabbed my sleeve, her fingers tight. She told me not to touch it. Her voice was low, almost hoarse. She said my dad did not want anyone opening Megan's things. That chest had been kept in the garage since the funeral. Her face held a different kind of fear. Not fear of my dad's temper, but fear of something older and heavier. The kind of fear you develop after hiding a truth for far too long. I asked her how long she had known about the chest. She said since the day he put it up there. She said she never opened it because she was told not to. Then she said something that clung to me long after she walked away. Some things are better left alone. I looked at the chest again. If Megan had left anything behind, it was there. If she wanted me to stop something from being buried, it might be inside that box. But I also knew that forcing my way into it while Martha stood there shaking would only get me thrown out a second time. So I stepped back, not giving up, just waiting for a better moment. I carried the first box to my car, then the second, then the third. Each trip felt heavier than it should have. Martha lingered near the doorway every time I passed, wringing a dish towel in her hands, apologizing without words. Part of me wanted to tell her that I knew she was trying, that she had always been caught between loyalty and guilt. But another part of me could not forgive her silence from the night before. When I finished loading the car, I stood on the driveway for a moment, breathing in the sharp cold. I was about to leave when a voice called my name. I turned and saw our neighbor, Mrs. Parker, standing at the edge of her walkway in a thick wool coat. She was in her late 70s now, still sharp-eyed and steady, the kind of woman who always saw more than she let on. She walked toward me, her boots crunching on the snow. She said she had heard I left the house last night. She glanced at the windows, then leaned in a little closer. She told me she had been thinking about Megan lately. She said there were things that had never made sense to her about the night. Megan died. She wanted to talk, but not out here where people could see. If I had time that evening, she said, I should come by her place. She would tell me what she remembered. For a moment, everything in me went still. I had never heard anyone in town question Megan's accident. My dad shut down any conversation about it. Even Martha stayed away from the topic. Hearing Mrs. Parker suggest that something about that night was off made goosebumps rise on my arms. I told her yes, I will come. Her face softened just slightly. She touched my arm with a cold, bony hand and told me not to mention it to my dad. Then she walked back to her house with the posture of someone bracing for a storm. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and let out a shaky breath. Snow had started falling again, soft flakes drifting across the windshield. I reached for my keys, but my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. A single new text message glowed on the screen from an unknown number. Do not ask questions about Megan. It is not safe. My stomach clenched. My first instinct was to look around, but the street was empty. Just my dad's house, Mrs. Parker's place. The quiet block is lined with sleeping trees and buried lawns. I read the message again. The wording was simple, But the meaning was clear. Someone did not want Megan's name spoken. Someone did not want me digging around in the past. I put the phone down on the passenger seat, my pulse racing harder than before. For years, I had tried to make peace with the story I had been given about my sister. She drove too fast. The roads were icy. End of story. But Megan had been cautious behind the wheel. She hated driving at night. And she had been frightened the last time I saw her. Now, less than one day after being pushed out of my dad's house, 2 different people had already sounded warnings. One telling me to come learn the truth. The other told me to stop. I turned the key and pulled away from the curb, the tires skidding slightly before gripping the road. As I drove past my dad's house, I looked at the garage. I imagined the small wooden chest sitting quietly on the high shelf inside, waiting, holding something Megan did not want buried. The farther I drove, the stronger the question pressed inside my chest. What happened to my sister the night she died, and why did someone in this town believe the truth could not come out? I kept, my hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the snowy road ahead. The morning light grew brighter, casting a pale glow over Maple Ridge. The town looked quiet and ordinary, like nothing bad could ever happen here. But I knew better now. Something had happened here. Something worth hiding. And by the time I reached the edge of town, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever people were trying to protect, whatever secret had been sealed away in that wooden chest, I was going to find it. Even if someone did not want me to. Even if it meant uncovering a truth that had been buried since the winter. Megan died. I was not turning back anymore. There was a box in my dad's garage that had waited almost 2 decades for me. And now, finally, I had the key. I left the motel a little before 6, the winter sky already dark, the roads glazed with a thin layer of ice. Every streetlight I passed cast long shadows across the snow, stretching like fingers reaching for something I could not see. I kept thinking about the anonymous text, the one warning me not to ask about Megan, and each time it flickered through my mind, my grip on the steering wheel tightened. By the time I parked near my dad's house again, the temperature had dropped enough that my breath came out in sharp white clouds. I walked the 2 houses down to Mrs. Parker's place, keeping my head low in case anyone happened to look out a window. Her porch light glowed soft yellow through the cold. Before I could knock, the door creaked open. Mrs. Parker stood there, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, her gray hair tied back low. She stepped aside and told me to get in before I froze. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, something like a weight she had been carrying for a long time. Inside, the warmth hit me immediately. Her living room looked almost unchanged from when I was a kid. Doilies on the armrests. A muted game show flickering across an old television. The smell of slow-cooked stew drifting from the kitchen. She motioned for me to sit at the small wooden table where she used to give me cookies when I visited with my sister. I sat. My heart thudded hard enough I could feel it in my wrists. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. She poured us both tea. Her hands trembled just slightly. I asked her what she wanted to tell me. She let out a long breath, the kind you release only after convincing yourself there is no turning back. Then she said she remembered the night before Megan's accident like it had happened last month. It was snowing, heavy flakes slanting in the wind. She had gone to bed early, but sometime near 10, she got up. On her way back from the bathroom, she heard shouting coming from our house next door. Not talking, not arguing, shouting. Voices that carried through the cold. She walked to her window and cracked it open. The sound came through clearer. She heard Megan first. Upset, her voice rising and breaking in places. Mrs. Parker could not hear every sentence, but she heard Megan say she could not keep carrying the secret, that she could not stay quiet forever. Then came my dad's voice. Loud, sharp, and full of something more than anger. Fear. He said that if Megan opened her mouth, she would tear the family apart. He said she needed to think about what she owed them. He said silence was the only way to keep their world intact. Hearing those words spoken aloud in her kitchen made the tiny room feel smaller. She said the shouting escalated for a few seconds. Then a door slammed hard enough she heard it clearly from next door. Something fell inside the house. She stressed it did not sound like someone being hit, more like an object knocked over or kicked in frustration. After that, everything went quiet. She had stood at her window listening. At first, she debated calling someone, but in Maple Ridge, neighbors try not to interfere unless they believe someone is in danger. She convinced herself it was just another family argument. Then she heard the front door of our house open. She saw Megan step outside wearing her winter coat, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Even from across the yard, she could see the shine of tears on her face. Megan looked back at the door once, then hurried to her car. She opened her window more and called out, asking if she was all right. Megan paused, one hand gripping the wheel, and said she was fine, just going for a drive to clear her head. Her voice shook. Then she turned onto the road that led toward the mountains. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. I felt my stomach tighten. My dad told everyone at the funeral that she had been going to visit a friend, that she hit black ice, that it was no one's fault, but he never mentioned a fight. He never mentioned threats about protecting the family. I asked Mrs. Parker what happened next. She said she went back to bed, though she barely slept. Early the next morning, she saw flashing lights through her living room window. A patrol car had arrived. The officer talked to Martha first, then to my dad. When she watched Martha collapse into my dad's arms, she knew something terrible had happened. Hours later, the news spread. The road up near the mountain pass had iced over. Megan's car slid off the side. They said she died instantly. The official story never changed after that. Mrs. Parker looked down at her teacup, her fingers tracing the rim. She said she stayed quiet because a few days after the funeral, my dad came to see her. He sat right where I was sitting, his eyes hollow. He thanked her for being a good neighbor. Then he asked her to remember Megan not by the last fight she had, but as the bright girl she had been. He said talking about the argument would only cause more pain, that it would rewrite her memory into something ugly. He asked her to let it rest. She agreed. For 17 years, she agreed. She said she had been wrong. I asked her why she changed her mind now. She told me seeing me yesterday, walking away from that house with my boxes, brought back an expression she had seen before. Megan had walked away with that same expression the night she died. Strong, hurt, determined. She said she could not stay quiet anymore. Then she stood, walked down the narrow hallway, and returned with a small silver key cupped in her palm. My breath caught. She set the key on the table between us. She said that a couple of weeks before Megan died, Megan came over to borrow something. They talked in the kitchen for a while. As she was leaving, Megan pressed the key into her hand and said to keep it safe. She said if anything ever happened to her, she should give it to me. My fingers tingled when I picked it up. The metal was cool, slightly worn at the edges. It felt familiar somehow. I closed my eyes for a second and pictured the wooden chest on the top shelf of my dad's garage. The little latch, the sticker, the age of the wood. Everything in me said the key belonged to that box. Mrs. Parker said she was sorry for keeping it so long. She said she had been afraid of stirring old trouble, afraid of my dad, afraid of what the truth might destroy. But she believed Megan had trusted her for a reason, and she believed that reason had finally arrived. I slipped the key into my coat pocket, my pulse thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then she said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She said she was not the only person who heard the fight that night. She said someone else knew. Someone who still lived close by. Someone who had even more reason than she did to stay quiet. I asked who she meant. She hesitated, glancing toward the living room window as if afraid someone might be watching. Her voice dropped lower. She said my dad had gone to that person too after the funeral, that he had asked them to protect the family's reputation, that he had asked them to keep things buried. Before I could ask again, she shook her head and said she would tell me when she was sure I would be safe hearing it. For now, all she could say was that I should not trust everything my dad ever taught me about loyalty. Her words settled in my chest like a cold weight. When I finally stood to leave, she put a hand on my arm. She told me to be careful. She said that small towns remember their secrets, even when they pretend they do not. Then she turned off the porch light, as if she were closing a door on 17. Years of silence. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow swirled in thin sheets across the street, stinging my face. I walked back toward my car, every sense sharpened. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I did not check it. I already knew what it would say. Someone did not want me digging. Someone did not want me touching the past. But I had the key now. The one Megan had left for me. The one my dad had wanted hidden. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled my coat tight around me. The garage at my dad's house was only 2 doors down. Dark. Silent. The wooden chest sat inside, waiting. I sat there with the silver key in my palm, its weight settling into my skin like it had been waiting for me. And if there was one person left in Maple Ridge who might know what Megan had been running from, it was Tom Reeves. I started the engine and drove toward the highway, the cold morning sun cutting across the snow like a blade. Tom's shop sat near a row of cottonwoods at the edge of town. When I pushed open the door, the bell above me jingled, and the smell of gasoline and pine cleaner drifted out from the back. A few seconds later, he stepped into view, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused when he recognized me, surprised, sliding into something softer. He said my name and asked when I got back. I told him a week ago. I did not tell him I had been kicked out of my dad's house on Christmas night. He studied my face anyway, like he saw the truth behind what I did not say. He asked if everything was all right. I said no. I asked if we could talk somewhere private, and he nodded. He flipped the sign on the door and led me to the back room, a cramped space filled with old motor parts and a worn couch that sagged in the middle. Once we sat down, he exhaled slowly, like he had been holding a secret in his chest for years. He said Megan had trusted him with something in 2007, something he had not known how to give me back then. My stomach tightened. I asked what he meant. Tom walked to a filing cabinet, pulled open the bottom drawer, and reached far into the back. When he returned, he held a cardboard shoebox pressed to his chest. My name was written across the lid in my sister's handwriting. Even after all these years, I recognized the way she looped her S and curled the tail of her Y. He said she gave him that box about 3 weeks before she died. She told him he was to give it to me only when I was strong enough to handle whatever was inside. He had never opened it. My throat tightened as he handed it over. The lid trembled in my hands when I lifted it. Inside was a stack of photos, a sealed envelope, and a small mini DV tape labeled with her initials. I felt like I was holding a time capsule from a version of our family I barely remembered. I opened the envelope first. Her letter was written on lined notebook paper, the top corner creased. She wrote that if I was reading this, she had failed to fix things in the way she hoped. She talked about feeling trapped in Maple Ridge, about carrying a secret that did not belong to her, but had been forced on her, all the same. She said she wanted to leave town, but something kept pulling her back. The last lines read, "I love you. Do not let silence fool you into thinking it is peace." A chill crawled through me as I folded the letter again. Next, I pulled out the mini DV tape. Tom still had a working camcorder in the shop. He set it up and connected it to the small TV on a rolling cart. The screen flickered, then steadied into an image. There she was. Megan, sitting on the old picnic table by the river, the bare cottonwoods behind her. She spoke into the camera without makeup, without her usual bright expression. Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes was restless, bruised from the inside. She said she felt watched, even when nobody was around. She said someone she loved wanted her to stay quiet about something she no longer believed she could ignore. She said if I was watching this, she would run out of time. When the tape clicked off, the room felt colder than before. I picked up the stack of photographs and flipped through them. They were simple snapshots from that last year. At a bonfire, at the river, on our front steps. In one picture, she was holding a mug and laughing at something off camera. The angle caught her wrist just right, and there it was, a faint bruise circling the skin like a hand had wrapped around it. I remembered my dad brushing it off at 2007, saying she slipped while carrying firewood. Looking at that bruise now, the explanation felt thin enough to tear. When I set the photos aside, my fingers brushed something metallic at the bottom of the box. I lifted it out and froze. Another key. Brass. Heavier. Its teeth cut differently than the silver one Mrs. Parker had given me. Tom asked what it was. I said I was not sure yet, but I knew what it might connect to. He did not press. He only asked if I was planning to go back to the house. I said, not tonight, but soon. He rested a hand briefly on my shoulder as he walked me to the front. He said he wished he had told me sooner, I told him he had given me exactly what I needed now. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. I climbed into my car and sat there with both keys in my lap, the silver one from Mrs. Parker and the brass one from Megan's box, two pieces of a lock I had not understood until now. Somewhere in my dad's garage, a wooden chest waited with whatever truth my sister had been protecting in 2007. And for the first time since she died, I felt close enough to touch the edges of the story she tried to leave behind. The two keys lay in my palm the whole drive back toward Maple Ridge. I kept glancing at them at every red light, half convinced they would somehow rearrange themselves into a message. The silver one from Mrs. Parker, the brass one hidden for nearly 2 decades in a box. Megan trusted someone else to guard. 2 pieces meant for the same lock. There was no way they were not connected to that wooden chest in the garage. By the time I reached my dad's street, dusk had already settled into the trees. The porch light of the house glowed a dull amber through the falling snow. I slowed as I passed, just enough to check the driveway. No truck. No car. Good. Dad and Martha were gone. I parked around the corner near the empty lot where kids played baseball in the summer. The wind cut across my coat as I walked up the sidewalk, boots crunching through the thin crust of ice. Every step made my pulse thud harder. I told myself this was not breaking in. I still had a key to the side door. It was my childhood home, but the truth sat heavy on my shoulders. I was not welcome here anymore. The garage door rattled slightly when I opened it. The hinges squealed, louder than I wanted. I slipped inside and shut it again quickly. The air smelled like motor oil and cold concrete. My breath came out in white puffs. I turned on the single bare bulb overhead. The light flickered before settling. Every box, every shelf, every old tool was exactly where I remembered. But now I noticed the locked upper cabinet in the corner, the one Dad always told me never to touch. The wooden chest sat inside that cabinet. I remembered its outline from years ago. The dusty, carved lid, the metal clasp with a tiny keyhole. Dad used to keep camping gear up there, or that was what he said. I dragged over the old step stool and climbed up. My hands shook as I pushed the cabinet doors open. There it was. Exactly as I pictured it, a rectangular cedar box, the grain darkened with age, the lid carved with a design that looked almost like a mountain range. I lifted it gently, surprised by its weight, and set it on the workbench. For a moment, I just stared at it. My fingers hovered over the clasp. I thought about Megan writing that letter, about her eyes in the video, about the bruise on her wrist. I thought about Mrs. Parker hearing the fight in 2007, and I thought about the way my dad had looked at me on Christmas night, like I had been stealing something from him my whole life. I slid the silver key into the keyhole. It resisted for a second, then clicked. I turned it. Nothing happened. There was another slot, tucked slightly underneath, almost invisible unless you looked closely. I inserted the brass key. This time the mechanism shifted with a heavy, metallic thunk. My heart slammed in my chest as the lid loosened. Inside, everything was wrapped in a faded flannel cloth. I unfolded it carefully. What lay beneath did not match anything I expected. A stack of envelopes, a spiral-bound notebook, a few loose forms with state logos in the corner, and a sealed manila folder with my dad's name written on the tab. I opened the top envelope first. Inside were bank statements, old ones, dated from late 2006 through spring 2007. Transactions circled in black ink, withdrawals labeled cash, a total far higher than anything someone on a highway maintenance salary could afford. $10,000, $18,000. Then a final withdrawal of nearly $30,000 just weeks before. Megan died. Cold washed down my spine. Next was the notebook. The handwriting was Megan's, page after page filled with dates, addresses, phone numbers, bits of conversations she must have overheard, names I recognized from our town council, someone from the county assessor office. And again, my dad's initials next to numbers that did not belong in any ordinary budget. My hands trembled as I flipped through it. On one page, written in jagged ink, she had copied a sentence from someone else's voice. He told me I should be grateful he trusts me with this. He says if anyone finds out, it will ruin all of us. I stopped breathing for a moment. The next page was even worse. Meeting near the storage unit south of town. He handed me the envelope, told me to stop asking questions, told me to get rid of it if I knew what was good for me. I set the notebook down, my breath catching in my throat. The edges of the room seemed to blur. I reached for the manila folder. Something inside shifted when I lifted it. I opened it and found photocopies of county property records. Several parcels on the north end of Maple Ridge listed under Shell Company names. The signatures on some documents looked almost like my dad's handwriting, though the ink and the angle were slightly different. Someone had forged something, or someone had signed something they were not supposed to. At the very bottom of the folder was a single sheet of lined paper. Megan had written on it in a hurry. I think I know what they are doing. If I cannot stop it, Jenna will have to. She is the only one who will not be afraid of them. My chest tightened so sharply I had to steady myself on the workbench. Them, not him, them. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my breath. The cold concrete beneath my boots seemed to tilt. Megan had not been scared of one person. She had been scared of a group, a system. Something bigger than just our dad losing his temper. The garage creaked as the wind pushed against the siding. For the first time, the house felt like it was watching me. I gathered the papers and slid them back into the wooden chest, not to hide them, but to carry them out with me. If someone came home early, I did not want to explain why I was standing here holding financial records from 17 years ago. As I folded the flannel cloth back over the items, something slipped from between two envelopes. A small, black thumb drive. It had no label, no markings, just a faint scratch down the plastic casing. I held it up to the light. My stomach twisted. Whatever was on it, Megan had placed it deliberately inside this box. And given everything else I had found, this might be the part she could not bring herself to talk about even in her video. I tucked it into my pocket and lowered the lid. The keys came out easily when I turned them. I wrapped the chest in my coat, cradling it against my chest, and climbed down from the step stool. The bulb above me flickered again. For a second, the garage dimmed, the shadows stretching across the floor like reaching fingers. When the light steadied, I exhaled and moved to the side door. Outside, the sky had deepened into a blue-gray twilight. Snow drifted lightly against my boots as I stepped into the yard. I locked the door behind me out of habit, even though nobody had trusted me with this house for a long time. I took 3 steps toward the sidewalk before I froze. A figure stood across the street near the corner, half-shadowed beneath a street lamp. I could not make out a face, only the shape of someone watching. I stared. They did not move. The cold air stung my lungs as I waited, heart pounding. After a few seconds, a car passed between us. When it cleared, the figure was gone. I walked faster, clutching the chest under my coat. My gaze kept jumping to the rearview mirror once I reached my car. Nothing behind me but swirling snow. Still, unease stayed lodged under my ribs the entire drive back to the motel. When I got inside, I set the chest on the bed and locked the door. I turned on every light in the room. The thumb drive glinted from where I had placed it on the blanket. My mouth felt dry just looking at it. The room heater rattled softly, filling the silence. My hands hovered over my laptop. I was not sure I was ready to see whatever was on the drive. Not yet. I wanted a clearer head. I wanted daylight. But before I could step away, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. One line. Stop digging, Jenna. You do not know what you are walking into. My fingers went numb. The motel walls felt too thin, like someone was standing right outside them. I read the message again, and again. The wooden chest sat silent on the bed beside me, holding the pieces of a truth that had been buried for nearly 20 years. Whoever sent that message knew I had not stopped, and they were getting nervous. The message on my phone kept replaying in my mind as I drove toward town, the words sinking deeper each time I breathed. Stop digging, Jenna. You do not know what you are walking into. I had not slept. Every sound in the motel hallway had made me sit up straight. But when morning came, one thought cut through the fog. If someone wanted me scared, then someone was afraid of what I might find next. And the next person I needed to talk to was Martha. I had called her twice with no answer. On the third attempt, her voice came through in a whisper, brittle and thin. She said she could not talk at home. She said to meet her at the flower shop where she worked part-time, a little place owned by her sister Sylvia on Birch Lane. When I pulled up, the parking lot was empty except for her old sedan. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of cold that felt like it was waiting to break open. I stepped inside and the bell above the door jingled softly. The air smelled like damp soil and eucalyptus. Rows of potted plants lined the windows, their leaves glowing under soft yellow lights. Martha stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge like she needed it to stay upright. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and there were new creases in her forehead that had not been there a month ago. She said my name quietly, as if speaking too loud might draw attention. She glanced toward the back room, then motioned me closer. I walked behind the counter, and she shut the half door between us. She asked if he knew I was coming to see her. She did not say his name, but she did not have to. I said no. She let out a breath like she had been holding it for years. She said she had seen me outside the house last night. She had come home from the grocery store and saw a car that looked like mine, parked down the street. She had not told him. She said she figured if I was creeping around the garage, I had already found something. I asked her what she meant by something. She rubbed her palms together, her fingers shaking. She said she had tried for years to convince herself that what happened to him, Megan, was an accident. She said she had tried to drown out that voice in her head that told her pieces did not fit. But every year on the anniversary, she saw the same haunted look in his eyes, the same tension, the same fear that someone might ask the wrong question. My heartbeat quickened. I asked her what she was afraid of. She pressed her lips tightly, then spoke in a low rasp. She said Megan had confided in her weeks before she died. She said she wanted to leave Maple Ridge. She said she wanted a life beyond the pressure in that house, beyond the constant weight of keeping quiet for him. She kept repeating that she did not know how long she could carry the secret he forced on her. I asked what the secret. Martha shook her head. She said Megan never told her the details, only that she had discovered something about the North End development, something he was involved in, something he warned her would destroy the family if she said a single word. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. Martha looked down at her hands. She said she had never seen him lay a hand on Megan. She wanted me to hear that part clearly. He was not a man who hit, but he knew how to use words like weapons. He knew how to push her into corners with guilt. He knew how to remind her that she owed him, that silence was the only path to keep their family intact. She said he had a way of bending people to him, not through kindness, but through pressure so constant it felt like gravity. I swallowed hard. It echoed everything I had seen in Megan's notebook. I asked Martha about the night Megan left the house. Her eyes glistened as she stared past me, as if replaying the memory on the far wall. She said they were in the kitchen. She had just finished loading the dishwasher when she heard Megan's voice, sharp and scared. She said she heard Megan say she was done covering for him, that she wanted to tell someone what she had found. Then, she said, his voice came through the doorway like a crack of ice. He said, "You will not run from this. You will not run from your responsibility." That word again, responsibility. The same word Mrs. Parker had heard through her window. I asked what happened next. Martin said Megan stormed out, shaking, eyes full of tears. She grabbed her coat, keys, and left without saying another word. Martha followed her to the porch, but stopped when she saw the look on my dad's face. She said it was not anger. It was fear. Cold, calculated fear. The next morning, he stood in the doorway drinking coffee, staring at the empty driveway. When Martha asked where Megan was, he said she was gone. At least now nothing will be dragged into the light. I felt something twist inside me, sharp and painful. I asked her why she never told anyone this. Why did she never tell me? Why did she let me believe the town story for almost 20 years? She looked at me with a kind of sorrow that made her look older. She said because he had convinced her that if the truth came out, it would wreck all of us. And she believed him. She was terrified of him. She said she was ashamed of that fear, ashamed of her silence. Tears filled her eyes. She reached under the counter. Her hands shook as she lifted a small velvet pouch and pressed it into my palm. She said, "There is something you need to see. Something I should have given you years ago. Something Megan wanted you to have when the time was right. My breath caught. I loosened the drawstrings and slid out the object inside. A key. Not silver, not brass, but iron. Darker, older, heavier. A third key. For a moment, I could not speak. I asked her where it came from. She said Megan had slipped it into her hand in the kitchen one afternoon at 2007. She told Martha to hide it somewhere safe. She said it was the last piece. She never explained what that meant. Martha said she had been too afraid to ask questions, too afraid to face whatever Megan had known. She told me that after I left the house, she had gone into the garage and seen the empty spot on the top shelf where the wooden chest once sat. She realized then that I had found what I needed, and she knew it was time to give me the rest. She said I deserved the truth more than anyone. I stared at the key in my palm, the edges rough against my skin. 3 keys. 3 people Megan had trusted more than him: Mrs. Parker, Tom, and Martha. 3 pieces she had scattered in case something happened to her. My heart hurt in a new way, thinking of her planning all this, knowing she might not get to finish what she started. I asked Martha if she ever confronted him about that night. She shook her head. She said she did not want to know what he might say. She said she had spent 17 years trying to keep the marriage steady, trying to make excuses for his temper, trying to build a life that did not collapse under its own lies. She looked at me with a trembling chin and said I was wrong to stay quiet. I should have told you. I should have warned you the night you came home crying with your boxes in your car. I am so sorry, Jenna. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I did not let them fall. There was too much inside me to let any of it out. Not yet. I stepped around the counter and hugged her. She flinched at first, then melted into my arms like she had been waiting for someone to forgive her. I told her I did not blame her. Not entirely. Fear can twist anyone. Silence can twist anyone. When I pulled away, she wiped her cheeks. She said she did not know what I was going to do next, but she wanted me to be careful. She said he was not the man he used to be. He was desperate now. And desperate men made reckless choices. I slipped the iron key into my pocket beside the silver and brass ones. 3 locks, 1 box, 1 truth. As I walked toward the door, Martha called my name again. I turned. She said, "Whatever you find, he will not let it go quietly." I stepped outside into the cold. Snowflakes drifted slowly, heavy and wet. The wind carried the faint scents of pine and smoke from a nearby chimney. I crossed the parking lot to my car with one thought pulsing through me, steady as a heartbeat. I finally had every key Megan left behind. And now I had no choice but to open everything she could not. Back in my motel room, I laid them out on the bed beside the wooden chest. Silver from Mrs. Parker, brass from Tom, iron from Martha, 3 small pieces of metal glinting under a cheap ceiling light, holding almost 20 years of fear and silence. The heater rattled in the corner. Outside, a plow scraped past on the street, pushing slush into gray piles. I just stood there for a minute, staring at what my sister had managed to do in the middle of her own storm. She had trusted 3 different people more than the one man whose last name we shared. I sat on the bed and pulled the chest closer. The lid felt heavy in my hands, like it knew what it had been holding back. The flannel cloth inside was still folded over the notebook. The copies of records, the loose documents I had already seen. I set them aside carefully, heart beating faster with each movement. There was one part I had not figured out yet. When I lifted the empty flannel, my fingers brushed a faint seam along the bottom plank. The wood felt thinner there. Megan always did love secret compartments in mystery books. The thought made my throat tighten. I ran my hand slowly along the inside edge until I found a tiny, circular indentation, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I slid the iron key from my pocket and held it up. Its end was cut in a small, round tip, like it had been made to fit exactly there. My hand shook as I pressed the key into the indent and turned. For a second, nothing happened. Then a soft click sounded under my palm. The false bottom rose just enough for me to get my fingers underneath. I lifted it out like it was made of glass. Beneath the panel was a single journal, spiral bound, the cardboard cover worn at the corners, Megan's handwriting looping across the front in blue ink, just her name and the year 2007. I swallowed hard and opened it. The first pages were ordinary if you did not read closely. Notes about her shifts at the diner, mentions of the weather, scribbled lists of things to pack if she ever really did leave Maple Ridge. But the tone shifted slowly, like a shadow creeping across a porch. She wrote about a man named Paul Carver. In town, everyone called him Pastor Paul. He ran the biggest church in Maple Ridge. He sat on the development board for the North End. He had his hands in almost every committee that mattered. People pointed to him when they talked about respectability and charity. Megan described the first time she saw him, late at night in the church office, counting envelopes of cash that were not supposed to be there. Money meant for a community fund that never seemed to help anyone outside a tight circle of friends. She had been cleaning after a youth event when she passed his door and heard voices. Heard Paul thanking someone for keeping zoning people happy. I heard my dad's voice too, quieter, agreeing that nobody needed to know where the money had come from. My eyes burned as I read. She wrote about a meeting at the diner 2 weeks later. Paul slid into her section long after the dinner rush. He told her she was a good daughter for helping her dad with little errands. He said family loyalty was a sacred duty. He left a tip in cash that was far too large for the meal he ordered. Marta, her boss at the time, had been thrilled. Megan had gone home feeling like she was carrying something dirty in her pocket. Her entries turned more fragmented as the pages went on. Snippets of overheard conversation. Council members joked about the North End land deal going through faster than any project that size should. Mentions of her going to the county office to drop off documents Dad said were routine. Then, realizing later that dates had been altered, signatures forced into place. She wrote that she had confronted Dad one night at the kitchen table. She had asked why the pastor needed him so badly, why their house had suddenly felt like a storage unit for sealed envelopes, and folders that he did not want left at his job. He had told her that Paul had helped him keep his job when there were cutbacks, that he had ensured the bank stayed patient when money was tight, that they owed him more than she understood. She wrote his words in jagged, ink pressed hard into the page. You will not throw away everything I have built. You will stay quiet to protect this family. My stomach turned. Megan described feeling like her life no longer belonged to her. She said every day felt like wearing someone else's clothes, pulling them tighter and tighter until she could not breathe. She wrote about walking past the church on Sundays, seeing families file in, smiling, while she carried the memory of Paul's smooth voice telling my dad that some truths were too heavy for small towns. She did not paint herself as a hero. She wrote about her own fear. She worries that if she went to the authorities, the whole town might turn on her, that Dad would be ruined, that Martha would be caught in the middle, that I would grow up in a place where my last name was spit out like a curse. I flipped forward, my fingers trembling over her words. Days blurred into weeks. Each entry edged closer to something breaking. On one page near the back, she wrote that she had gathered what evidence she could without them noticing. Photocopies, bank slips, note recorded as soon as she got home from overhearing anything useful. She wrote that she had hidden some with someone she trusted, in case she could not deliver them herself. My chest ached when I thought of Mrs. Parker and Tom. Then came the last entries. She wrote that the arguments with our dad had reached a point where every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. She wrote that he had pleaded with her one night, saying if she kept this up, they would lose everything. House, job, reputation. He said nobody would ever hire him again, that nobody would ever look at any of us the same way. She wrote that he did not ask her what it felt like to carry the images in her head, the envelopes, the whispered deals. The way Pastor Paul smiled in public and changed his tone in empty hallways. She wrote that he only talked about what her honesty might cost him. The final page was shorter, just a few lines at the bottom, the ink darker like she pressed harder than usual. I cannot keep living between silence and lies. I cannot breathe in this house anymore. If I stay here and keep playing along, whatever is left of me will die in this darkness. If something happens to me, this book cannot stay hidden with him. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the journal. I read that last paragraph 3 times. The words blurred, then sharpened again. It was not a suicide note. It was not a neat confession. It was the voice of someone drowning, reaching for air any way she could. Did she get in the car that night planning to disappear and start over somewhere else? Did she think she could drive far enough away that the roads and the secrets would let her be? Or did she only mean to go for a drive to clear her head, the way she told Mrs. Parker, and the ice did the rest? I did not know. What I did know was that my dad had never told me any of this. He had never mentioned the pastor, the development board, the money, the pressure. He had only told me Megan drove too fast. I closed the journal slowly, my fingers resting on the worn cover. My breath came shallow and fast. The cheap motel lamp made a weak pool of light around the bed. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere in the parking lot. Voices drifted, then faded. For the first time, the room felt too small to hold everything I had just read. I stood up with the journal still in my hands and moved to the little table by the window. The curtain was cracked just enough for me to see a slice of the lot. A dark pickup had pulled in near my car. The shape of the man climbing out was too familiar to mistake. Dad. My stomach dropped. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering in my throat. How had he found me? The motel was not exactly hidden, but I had not told him where I was staying. Martha would not have. Mrs. Parker would not. Tom certainly would not, had he followed me. Had someone else told him? A knock sounded on the door, hard, 3 sharp raps that made the frames shudder. I did not move. Another knock, louder. Jenna! His voice carried through the thin wood, flat and controlled. Open this door. My mind raced. I looked at the chest on the bed, at the journal in my hands, at the 3 keys on the nightstand, each one a part of a story he had spent years trying to bury. The handle rattled. He spoke again, voice a notch lower. I know what you took. I know what you have been reading. Fear shot through me, hot and electric, but beneath it was something else. Anger. Tired, old anger that had been simmering since Christmas dinner, and maybe long before that. I set the journal gently on the table and took a step toward the door. Another step. My hand closed around the knob. The moment before I turned it, everything went quiet in my head, like someone had flipped a switch. No more excuses. No more pretending. I opened the door. He filled the doorway, snow clinging to his coat, jaw clenched so tight I could see the pulse in his neck. His eyes dropped to the journal behind me, then back to my face. You have gone too far, Jenna. He stared at me from the doorway, snow melting in small droplets on his shoulders, eyes fixed and sharp enough to pin me in place. I held his gaze, refusing to back away even as my heartbeat rattled in my chest. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and shut the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed through the room, like something final. He did not take off his coat. He just moved past me, looked around the room, found the wooden chest on the bed, and exhaled a stiff breath through his nose. So that is what you have been so busy with. His tone cut the air between us, cold, controlled, not surprised, only angry that I had gotten this far. He sat in the motel chair by the window, the legs scraping faintly across the floor. Then he gestured toward the other chair for me to sit. It was not a request. I stayed standing. His jaw tightened. You always did think rules were suggestions, he said. Even as a kid. Megan, too. The sound of her name in his mouth made my stomach twist. I asked him what he was doing here. He said he came because he needed to set limits, because Martha was rattled, and because he knew I was stirring up trouble. That did not belong to me. Because someone had to stop me before I ruined everything. Everything. That word again. The word he had used when he talked about Megan 17 years ago. Never her life. Never her fear. Never her pain. Always. Everything. His everything. I looked him dead in the eyes and asked, what exactly am I ruining? He leaned back, slowly. He folded his hands in front of him like he was preparing for a meeting. He said, you do not know what was at stake back then. You do not know what your sister got herself into. You do not know the damage she could have caused. I asked him what secret he forced her to keep. He smirked slightly, a joyless stretch of the mouth. You think this is about secrets. This is about survival. For this family. For this town. For people who counted on certain decisions being made quietly. I felt heat rising behind my eyes. Megan was drowning, Dad. She was terrified. And you let her carry it alone. He snapped back so quickly it startled me. She was not a child. She knew what silence meant. She knew what speaking out would do to all of us. I took a step toward him. You mean what it would do to you? His eyes flashed. He stood up, slow and deliberate, like a man trying to keep control of a shaking tide. He said I protected this family. I made choices you will never understand. Choices that kept us afloat when we were one missed paycheck from losing the house. That pastor, those donations, those deals. They kept this town alive. And she did not have the right to tear it all down. I stared at him, stunned at how casually he said it. Like the ethics of it were irrelevant. Like the harm done to my sister did not matter because he thought the end justified the means. I asked him again what happened that night. Tell me the truth. He rubbed his forehead with a trembling hand, the first sign that his mask was slipping. He said, we argued. She wanted to go to the county, to the press, to anyone who would listen. She said she would not lie anymore. She said she did not care if it meant we would lose everything. I told her she did not understand the consequences. I stepped closer, feeling my pulse throb in my neck. Did you threaten her? He looked at me with that same mix of disappointment and irritation he used on me my whole life. I talked to her like a father talks to a daughter who is about to ruin her own life. That is all. I felt something inside me harden. He went on, voice rising slightly. She stormed out. I took the car. It was freezing rain. Roads were terrible. She was emotional. Reckless. If she had just calmed down, if she had just listened, if she had stayed instead of running off in a tantrum, she would still be here. I could not breathe for a moment. So you are blaming her for her own death? He looked at me like I was being dramatic. I am saying she made a choice, and it ended badly. Not everything that happens is someone's fault. Sometimes it is just the cost of a moment. The cost of a moment. Those words cut through me like shards of ice. I whispered, you broke her. You and that pastor and those men. You made her feel like her silence was the only thing keeping our family alive. And when she tried to breathe for 1 second, she fell apart under the weight of everything you piled on her. He slammed his palm against the dresser and the lamp shook. I never laid a hand on her. I never wanted her hurt, but she pushed and pushed until she forced my hand. I had to protect what mattered. Protect what mattered. Not Megan. Not me. Not Martha. His reputation. His comfort. His alliances. His carefully curated place in Maple Ridge. I felt a tightness rise in my throat. I asked him what exactly he was trying to protect now, what truth he thought he could still bury. His voice dropped to a low growl. You think you know what is inside that journal. You think you know what the pastor did. You think you can drag old ghosts back from the grave and not suffer the consequences. You have no idea how deep this went. How many people relied on that project? How many will suffer if you open your mouth the way she wanted to? My hands curled into fists. So you really cared more about that land deal than her life? He exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between anger and exhaustion. This is bigger than you. Bigger than her. You have no right to pick apart things you were never meant to understand. I stepped toward him until we were only a foot apart. I said she died carrying your secret. And you let her. You let her walk out of that house, shaking and alone. If you had protected her instead of the men who used you, she might still be alive. His face twisted into something bitter. You are twisting everything. She was unstable, emotional, dramatic, always looking for something to blame. Those words made me see red. I said, you do not get to rewrite her. Not anymore. He grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firm, like he wanted to anchor me in place. You will stop this, right now. You will put that journal away. You will stop talking to people. You will stop digging into matters that were settled years ago. I pulled my arm back. And what if I do not? His jaw flexed, his eyes narrowed. Then he said the words that told me everything I needed to know. Because if you do not stop, Jenna, you will destroy this family, just like she did. I stared at him, my chest rising and falling too fast. That was his truth, the core of him. Megan had not died tragically or accidentally in his mind. She had died because she disobeyed him, because she refused to carry the burden he handed her. I felt something cold settle into me, a kind of clarity I had not felt since the night I was thrown out of his house. I stepped back, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the door. He barked my name, but I did not stop. I opened the door, and the hallway air rushed in, cold and sharp against my skin. I turned back just long enough to look him in the face. I said, "You did not kill her with your hands, but you killed her with your silence, your pressure, your need to keep your name clean, and I will not let that be the final version of her story." His mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped into the hallway and shut the door behind me. My legs felt weak as I walked toward the stairs, but my mind had never been clearer. The truth did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to Megan. And now it belonged to me. The next afternoon, Sylvia's living room felt smaller than I remembered, even though she had pushed the furniture back to make space. The old brick fireplace was dark, the mantel crowded with family photos, all of them staring down at us like a silent jury. Sylvia stood near the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. Ethan sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, watching me with a worried frown. Martha gripped a tissue in both hands, twisting it until it looked like a thin, white rope. Mrs. Parker sat in the armchair closest to the window, her cane leaning against the side, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Tom hovered near the wall, restless, fingers tapping against his leg. Officer Clark sat in a straight-backed chair near the coffee table, a worn manila folder resting on his lap. And near the far wall, next to the archway to the kitchen, Dad stood. He did not sit. He just leaned back, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes on me like this whole meeting was an inconvenience. Sylvia glanced at me and gave a small nod. This had been my idea, but I had needed her house, somewhere not tied to my childhood bedroom, or the church basement, or a courthouse, somewhere that felt like neutral ground, even if nothing about this was neutral. I took a breath and stepped into the space in front of the coffee table. I said, "I know this feels strange. Maybe some of you think this is unnecessary, but for almost 20 years, we have all been carrying different pieces of what happened the night Megan died. Today, we are going to put them together." Ethan shifted, his eyes darting toward his uncle. Dad stared straight ahead. I picked up the wooden chest from the table. I had brought only a few things from it, the ones that mattered most for this conversation. Megan's journal, the copied records, the notes she had written in her own hand. I said Megan was not just a girl who hit black ice. She knew something she should not have known, something about this town, and about a man everyone trusted. Officer Clark spoke for the first time, his voice low and steady. He had retired from the Maple Ridge Department a few years back, but he still carried himself like a man used to weighing his words. He said, "When this was first brought to me, I thought your sister had just gone down a rabbit hole. Lots of people talk about corruption. Very few actually find it. Then your dad came into my office. All eyes slid to Dad. He did not blink. I opened Megan's journal and read a few lines. Not everything, just enough for them to hear her voice. She saw Pastor Paul and others moving money that should have gone to community projects. She picked up documents for you, Dad, that had wrong dates and signatures. She heard conversations about the North End land deal going through smoother than it should have." Tom nodded once, eyes dark. He had seen the video. He knew. Mrs. Parker shifted in her chair, wringing her hands together. I said Megan tried to carry it alone at first. She was scared. She talked to people she trusted. She trusted you, Mrs. Parker. She trusted you, Tom. She trusted Martha. She saw enough to know something was wrong. Mrs. Parker let out a soft sound that was almost a sob. "I never knew all of it," she said, voice shaking. "I just heard her crying after that fight. I heard him yelling about responsibility. And I stayed quiet." Ethan turned to look at her, eyes wide. "Mrs. Parker," she held up a trembling hand. Let me finish, honey. I looked at Officer Clark. He opened his folder and pulled out a thin stack of papers, edges yellowed with age. Back when the accident happened, he said, the original report included mention of a domestic dispute the night before. Hello Parker told us she heard shouting. There was a note that tensions in the home might have contributed to Megan's state of mind. He paused, then looked at Dad. The next day, your dad came into the station and asked to speak with my supervisor. Said it would destroy his family if we put any suggestion of an argument in. The official report said we would be tainting the memory of a good girl. Sylvia sucked in a breath. She looked from Clark to Dad, disbelief tightening her features. I asked Clark, and did you change it? He nodded, his shoulders sagging a little. The notation was removed from the final version. The accident stood as a simple slide on ice. No mention of what happened beforehand. Dad pushed off the wall then, jaw working. He said, what difference would it have made? She was dead either way. Dragging our private fights into the file would not have brought her back. Martha flinched like he had slapped her. I said it would have told the truth. That she did not just go for a joyride. That she left that house in pieces because you made her choose between her conscience and your reputation. He glared at me. You make it sound so simple. Tom straightened from the wall. Simple or not, she was drowning, he said. And instead of throwing her a lifeline, you put a weight on her shoulders. Ethan looked between us, his face pale. So all those years, he said slowly, all those stories about her just losing control on the pass, that was only half the story. He turned to his uncle. Why did you not tell us any of this? Dad's mouth flattened into a hard line. You were a child, he said. You did not need to know the ugly parts. Mrs. Parker suddenly covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook. I watched her for a second, the guilt of nearly 2 decades pouring out all at once. I am so sorry, Jenna, she said through tears. I heard them that night. I heard her say she could not keep quiet. I heard him tell her she had to, and I told myself it was not my business. Sylvia moved to her side and rested a hand on her shoulder. She looked at me over Mrs. Parker's head. She said I knew pieces. Not enough, but pieces. I knew Dad had gotten too close to that church and that board. I heard whispers about money. I saw Megan change. But I did not push. I did not ask enough. For that, I am sorry too. Martha had been silent this whole time, eyes fixed on the floor. Now she stood slowly, her tissue falling to the carpet. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. She said Dad did not run her off the road. He did not sabotage her car. He did not stand on that mountain and push. She looked at him, and for the first time I saw something like anger in her eyes. But he backed her into a corner so tight she could not see any way out, she said. He chose a man in a pulpit and his own pride over his daughter's soul. He told her that if she told the truth, she would destroy us, so she drove into a storm trying to breathe. And I let it happen. I stood in that kitchen and did nothing. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and Mrs. Parker's quiet sobs. Martha turned to me. The guilt has followed me every day since, she said. I did not speak up when I should have. I let his fear become my fear. I let it swallow her. That is on him. And it is on me. Adam shook his head, his face flushed. You are all painting me as some monster, he muttered. I made the best choices I could with what I had. That pastor helped this town. People here have roofs over their heads because of that development. Clark's voice cut in, firmer now. At a cost, he said. That project was investigated years later in another county. The same pattern showed up. Quiet deals, missing funds, pressured staff. Your name was on some of the paperwork. Not enough for charges, but enough to know your daughter was not imagining things. David stared at him, stunned that someone else had been looking. I stepped closer to the coffee table, placed my hand on Megan's journal, and spoke as evenly as I could. Nobody is saying you meant for her to die, I said. But the truth is, she did not die because she was some silly girl driving too fast. She died carrying your secret for as long as she could bear it. She died because you made her believe that her silence was the only thing keeping us from falling apart. Martha nodded, tears streaming freely now. She said Randall did not hurt her with his hands, but his pressure, his obsession with being seen as a good man, push her into that car. And I am done pretending otherwise. Sylvia looked at him then, eyes hard. I am too, she said. This family has been living under a story that never fits. It is time we stop. Dad's gaze moved slowly around the room. From Clark to Mrs. Parker, to Tom, to Sylvia, to Martha, to Ethan, to me. For a heartbeat, I thought he might say something honest, something human, something like the truth. Instead, he let out a bitter laugh, short and sharp. You all want a villain, he said. Fine, let it be me. But do not come crying when this little crusade burns down more than you expect. He turned toward the door. Ethan stood up quickly. Uncle, wait, he said. You cannot just walk away from this. Dad did not look back. He opened the front door and stepped out into the cold. The screen swung shut behind him with a hollow smack. A moment later, the sound of his truck starting echoed down the quiet street. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Clark cleared his throat. He said, I cannot promise the law can fix what happened that night. Statutes run out. Evidence fades. But the record can be corrected. The full context can be noted. Megan does not have to stay frozen in that one version of events. I looked at Megan's name scrawled on the journal cover, at the worn edges of the pages she had filled, trying to do the right thing. For the first time since I came home, I felt like we had dragged her memory out of the shadows and into the light. After that day at Sylvia's house, everything in Red Lodge seemed to tilt a few degrees. Nothing dramatic at first. No headlines, no sirens, just small shifts, like snow sliding in slow motion off a roof. Officer Clark met me twice more that winter. He brought updated paperwork, copies of addendums he had filed to Megan's old case. Quiet corrections. Notes added into the official record about the argument, the pressure, the context no one had wanted to see 17 years earlier. He said it might not change the cause of death on paper, but it changed the story behind it. Sometimes, that is all you can do. Word always travels in a small town. Even when no one says it out loud, people stopped calling Dad for help with zoning questions. He stopped getting invited to serve on committees and boards. The new pastor at the church took over most community outreach. There were whispers at the grocery store, in line at the post office, at the diner where old men drank coffee and watched the snowplows. Dad began to pull back. First, he skipped Sunday services a few times. Then he stopped going altogether. He quit his volunteer posts. I would drive past the house sometimes and see the curtains drawn in the middle of the day, the yard slowly losing its careful edges. Martha moved out that spring. She called me one morning from a motel on the highway outside Billings. Her voice sounded exhausted, but there was something lighter underneath it that I had never heard before. She said she had packed 2 suitcases and left a note on the kitchen table. She said she could not live in a house where the air was still thick with things unsaid. She did not ask me to help her pack. She did not ask me to run interference. She just told me where she would. And for the first time since she came into my life, I heard her choose herself. Mrs. Parker started stopping me on the sidewalk every time she saw me. She would squeeze my hand and tell me about a different small memory of Megan she had been too afraid to share before. The time Megan helped her carry groceries up the icy stairs. The time Megan came over with hot cocoa because she saw ambulance lights outside and wanted to make sure Mrs. Parker was all right. Each story made my heart ache and mend at the same time. Sylvia and I grew closer in a way we had never quite managed before. One afternoon, as we sat at her kitchen table with coffee gone cold, she told me she wished she had been braver when we were younger. I told her we could start now. Sometimes doing the right thing late is still better than never doing it at all. Ethan came to see me a week before I moved. He stood in the doorway of my motel room, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, that familiar Whitfield stubbornness in his eyes. He said he loved his uncle, but he also believed me. He believed Megan. He believed the words in that journal. Living with both those truths was going to be hard. I told him it was not his job to fix Dad. It was his job to decide what kind of man he wanted to be with the information he had. He hugged me awkwardly and said he would come visit when I got settled. By early summer, the motel room walls felt too tight for my lungs. I had come back to Red Lodge with my life in 2 boxes and a dented car. Now I had Megan's chest, a folder of updated records, and the knowledge that I had done what I could here. It was time to leave. Billings was not far in miles, but it felt like a different world. Bigger, louder. Anonymous in a way that was both unnerving and comforting. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of downtown, above a coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon every morning. I set up a second-hand desk near the window and turned my freelance design work into a real business instead of a side gig. Some days I would catch myself looking out across the city, thinking about how Megan had dreamed of leaving and never got the chance. I tried to build the kind of life she might have liked for me. Simple, honest, mine. People in Billings did not know my last name when they met me. They knew my work. They knew my laugh. They knew I drank my coffee with too much cream and walked too fast when I was thinking. It was a strange relief to be seen as Jenna first, and not as Randall's daughter or Megan's sister. I still called Martha once a week. She eventually found a small apartment of her own, a job at a bakery where no one knew the history of her marriage. She sounded lighter every month. Not healed exactly. That takes longer, but freer, like someone who finally stepped out from under a shadow and discovered the sun. As for Randall, I heard about him only in fragments. A neighbor said he hardly left the house anymore. Ethan mentioned in a text that his uncle spent most days sitting in the living room, television on, sound low, staring at nothing. No church. No committees. No long talks about responsibility. He had chosen his version of survival. Now he had to live with it. Spring of 2025 came to Montana slowly, the way it always does. Snowbanks shrank inch by inch. The river near Billings ran higher. The trees outside my apartment window softened from bare branches to the first hints of green. One Saturday morning, I woke up with a clear thought in my mind. It is time. I made the drive back to Red Lodge alone. The roads were clear, mountains sharp against the pale blue sky. The closer I got, the more my chest tightened. I had driven this route so many times in my life. As a child pressed against the backseat window. As a teenager counting the minutes to get away. As a grown woman coming home to face the ghosts I had tried to outrun. The cemetery sat on a low hill at the edge of town, overlooking a valley that turned gold in the fall. I parked by the fence and walked up the path, boots crunching on gravel. A few robins hopped in the grass near the stones, the first brave birds of the season. I knew the way to her grave by heart. Even though I had avoided it for years, my feet still remembered. The headstone was simple, the way my mom had wanted it. Megan Whitfield. Beloved daughter and sister. The dates carved into the granite marked a life that looked too short in. Numbers for how big it had been in my memory. Someone had left a small bunch of silk flowers there, faded now from winter. Maybe Martha. Maybe Mrs. Parker. Maybe even Dad, on a day when he could not stand the weight of his own choices. I knelt and brushed away a stray leaf. For a few moments, I just let myself sit in the quiet. The air smelled like damp earth and thawing snow. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faintest hint of new grass. I set down the fresh bouquet I had brought, tulips and daffodils in soft colors that made me think of the dress Megan wore to her high school graduation. I rested my fingers lightly on the top edge of the stone. I said softly that I knew now. That I knew she had not been dramatic or unstable or trying to cause trouble. That she had been trying to do the right thing in a place that preferred comfort over truth. That she had been braver than any of us realized. I told her the record had been changed. That Mrs. Parker had finally spoken. That Martha had finally left. That the pressure she had carried in silence had been dragged into the light. That Officer Clark had put her fear and her courage into official words where they belonged. I told her she did not die just because of a slick road. She died under the weight of being told to stay quiet. I sat back on my heels and let myself cry a little then. Not the jagged sobs of the first years, but a slow, deep ache that had room for both grief and gratitude. Gratitude that she had trusted me enough to leave pieces behind. Gratitude that I had found the strength to pick them up. When the tears dried, I wiped my face with my sleeve and stood. The sun had shifted, warm on the back of my neck. I looked down at her name one last time and spoke the words I had come to say. You did not die because you were weak, Meg. You died because the people who should have protected you asked you to carry their shame. I have said out loud what you were punished for even thinking. I have told the truth for you. You are not just an accident on a mountain road anymore. A small gust of wind moved through the branches above, scattering a few petals across the grass. I watched them drift, then took a step back. As I walked down the hill toward my car, a strange calm settled over me. For 17 years, my life had been tied to that night, in one way or another, to the argument I had not heard, to the road I had avoided, to the grave I had not visited enough, because looking at it hurt too much. Now, for the first time, I felt something like release. I did not want revenge anymore. Not in the way I thought I had when I first came back, with my heart full of rage and old hurt. Getting even would never bring her back. It would never turn Randall into the father I had wanted him to be. What I had done instead was break the silence that had strangled our family. I had pulled the story out of the shadows and made people look at it. I had given my sister back her complexity, her courage, her humanity. That was enough. When I started the car and pulled away from the cemetery, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The hill, the stones, the town itself grew smaller and smaller until they blurred into the landscape. Ahead of me, the road curved toward Billings, and whatever came next. I drove with the windows cracked just enough to let spring air into the car. The mountains stood steady on the horizon. The sky stretched wide and clear. By the time I reached the city, the heaviness in my chest had shifted into something else. Not joy exactly, not yet, but space. Room to breathe. Room to build a life that was not defined by the worst thing that ever happened to my family. I parked near my building, climbed the stairs, and unlocked the door to my apartment. On the way in, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked tired, older than my 32 years in some ways, but there was a steadiness in my eyes I had not seen before. Later that night, as I sat at my little desk with my laptop open, the glow lighting up the room, I thought about how many people carry stories like this and never get to speak about them. Sisters, daughters, wives, mothers, people who were told to be quiet for someone else's comfort. So if you are listening to this and any of it feels familiar, I want you to hear me. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.